I'm Kinsley, 32 female. I'm an architect, living in a city that I helped shape, even in small ways. My life was built on clean lines, solid foundations, and the belief that if you constructed something with care and integrity, it would last. For years, that foundation included my family and my long-term boyfriend, Gavin. I thought our futures were intricately designed and permanently intertwined. It turns out, the blueprints I was reading were a complete fabrication, hiding a demolition plan aimed directly at me. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Life, up until about 6 months ago, was predictable in the best way possible. It was a well-designed structure, comfortable and secure. My days were filled with the satisfying challenge of my work. As a junior partner at a mid-sized architectural firm, I spent my hours sketching, drafting, and overseeing projects that transformed empty lots into community hubs and outdated buildings into modern, functional spaces. My evenings were usually spent with Gavin. We had been together for 7 years, a length of time that felt both like a lifetime and no time at all. We shared a sleek, minimalist apartment downtown that I had, of course, designed the interior for. It was our sanctuary, a quiet space filled with natural light, clean lines, and the shared promise of a future. We weren't married, but it was a topic that floated comfortably between us, an eventuality we both assumed was on the horizon. Gavin was a real estate agent, charming and ambitious. His job was to sell people their dream homes, my job was to design them. We called ourselves a power couple, a perfect synergy of aesthetics and commerce. Looking back, I see the irony in that. He was a salesman, and he had sold me a beautiful, elaborate lie. My family was the other pillar of my existence. My father, Howard, was a construction foreman, a man who believed in hard work, firm handshakes, and the unshakable authority of his own opinion. He was proud of me for following a path related to his own, for understanding the language of blueprints and building codes. My mother, Lorraine, a former bank teller, was the softer counterpoint to my father's gruff exterior. She managed the family's emotions and social calendar, always ensuring that birthdays were celebrated and Sunday dinners were mandatory. And then there was my sister, Brielle. 5 years my junior, Brielle was the artist to my architect, the chaos to my order. While I found beauty in structure and logic, she found it in spontaneity and flair. She worked as a part-time event planner, a job that suited her personality, all sparkle and fleeting moments. We were different, but I believed we were close. I was the responsible older sister, the one who helped her with her resume, co-signed for her first car, and always had a shoulder available for her to cry on during her frequent romantic dramas. I saw her as my bubbly, sometimes misguided, but ultimately loving little sister. I was her rock, and I never imagined she would be the one to shatter my world. The dynamic was set. I was the stable one, the successful one. Brielle was the free spirit my parents fretted over, worrying about her career choices and her financial instability. Gavin was the golden boy, the son-in-law they adored. He knew how to charm my father with talk of the housing market and how to compliment my mother's cooking in a way that made her beam. He was family. Our Sunday dinners were a weekly ritual. We'd gather at my parents' suburban home, the one I grew up in. The conversations were always the same. My dad would ask about my latest project, my mom would ask Gavin when he was finally going to propose, and they would both ask Brielle if her latest job had the potential to become a real career. Brielle would usually roll her eyes, and Gavin would deftly change the subject, often by praising me for some recent accomplishment, positioning himself as my biggest supporter. It was all so normal, so perfectly constructed. I was so focused on the facade that I never bothered to check the foundation for cracks. The first hint of a tremor came subtly. Gavin started working late more often, citing a hot market and clients with demanding schedules. When he was home, he was more distant, his attention glued to his phone. He de-angled the screen away from me, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that I initially dismissed as a courtesy. The easy intimacy we shared began to feel strained. Our conversations became more functional, about bills and groceries, rather than dreams and plans. I tried to talk to him about it, expressing my concern that we were drifting apart. He would always reassure me, blaming work stress and promising things would get back to normal soon. "It's just a phase, Kins," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "I'm just exhausted. Once this big deal closes, I'm all yours." I wanted to believe him, so I did. I doubled down, trying to be more supportive, planning date nights that he would often cancel at the last minute. I told myself that long-term relationships have their ebbs and flows, and this was just an ebb. At the same time, Brielle was going through another one of her crises. Dee had a messy breakup with her on-again, off-again boyfriend and was, in her words, an emotional wreck. She started calling me constantly, crying about being lonely and lost. She also began showing up at our apartment unannounced, often when Gavin was home. She'd bring takeout, claiming she didn't want to be alone. I saw it as my sisterly duty to support her. I'd listen for hours as she lamented her love life, offering advice and comfort. Gavin was always so good with her. He'd listen patiently, offer a brotherly hug, and tell her that she deserved better. "Any guy would be lucky to have you, Brielle," he'd say. I remember feeling a swell of pride, watching my boyfriend be so kind to my sister. I thought, this is what a true family man looks like. I never suspected that his kindness was a performance, and that the real drama was happening right under my nose. I was the audience, watching a play where I thought I was the lead, when in reality, I wasn't even in the cast. The life I thought I knew was a meticulously crafted stage set, and the final act was about to begin without me. The end of my 7-year relationship happened on a Tuesday. It was unceremonious, clinical, and utterly devastating. I had just returned home from a site visit, my boots dusty and my mind still buzzing with structural calculations. I found Gavin in the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes. He wasn't packing my things, he was packing his. The sight was so incongruous, so alien in our shared space, that for a moment my brain couldn't process it. I thought he was helping a friend move, or perhaps gathering things for charity. The truth was far simpler and far more brutal. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice small. He wouldn't look at me. He just kept folding his shirts with a tense, methodical precision, placing them into a box labeled clothes. "I can't do this anymore, Kinsley," he said, his voice flat and devoid of the warmth I had known for years. "Do what anymore? What are you talking about?" The panic was a cold wave washing over me. "Gavin, look at me, talk to me." He finally stopped and turned, his face a mask of strained resignation. I'm not happy, I haven't been for a while." The words were like punches, each one knocking the air out of my lungs. "Not happy? Why didn't you say anything? We can work on it. We can go to counseling. We can do anything." I was pleading, my professional composure dissolving into raw desperation. "No," he said, and the finality in that single word was absolute. "It's over. I'm moving out." There was no big fight, no dramatic shouting match. It was a quiet, sterile amputation. He offered no real explanation, just vague platitudes about growing apart and needing different things. He said he had been staying for my sake, not wanting to hurt me, but that he couldn't live a lie any longer. He packed his boxes, called a friend to help him load his car, and within 2 hours, a 7-year chapter of my life was just gone. He left behind his key on the kitchen counter, next to a faint coffee ring from that morning, a ghostly imprint of a life that no longer existed. I spent that night curled up on the sofa an hour, my silent apartment, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of him, feeling a hollowed-out emptiness I had never known. The grief was immense, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. The next few days were a blur of shock and sorrow. I called my parents and told them the news. My mother was heartbroken for me, her voice laced with pity. My father was angry, his protective instincts kicking in. "What do you mean he just left? Did he give you a reason? The coward," he grumbled. I called Brielle, sobbing down the phone line. She was the perfect portrait of a supportive sister. "Oh, Kinsley, I'm so sorry. I can't believe he would do this to you. He's a monster. You're so much better off without him." She came over immediately, bringing ice cream and bad movies. She held me while I cried, stroking my hair and echoing my own confused questions. How could he just throw away 7 years? What kind of person does that? She was my fiercest defender, my partner in righteous anger. She cursed his name, called him every name under the sun, and reassured me that I was beautiful, brilliant, and would find someone so much better. Her support was a lifeline in a sea of grief. It was the one solid thing I felt I could hold on to. For 3 weeks, I went through the motions of life. I went to work, where I stared blankly at blueprints, my mind unable to focus. I came home to an apartment that felt cavernously empty. Brielle was a constant presence, checking in daily, offering to run errands, and making sure I was eating. My parents called every day, their concern a heavy blanket. The narrative was set. Gavin was the villain who had inexplicably and cruelly broken my heart. I was the victim, blindsided and shattered. My family had circled the wagons around me, and I was grateful for their protection. The bombshell dropped during Sunday dinner, exactly 1 month after the breakup. We were all gathered at my parents' house, the first time since Gavin had left. His absence was a palpable void at the table. My mother had made my favorite meal, a gesture of comfort that almost brought me to tears. The conversation was stilted, carefully skirting around the topic of my personal life. Then, halfway through the meal, Brielle cleared her throat. She had been unusually quiet all evening, picking at her food. "I have something I need to tell you all," she said, her voice trembling slightly. We all turned to look at her. I assumed it was another drama with her job or her landlord. I prepared myself to offer solutions, to be the dependable big sister once again. "I'm pregnant," she announced. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. My father's fork clattered onto his plate. My first reaction was a surge of confused happiness for her. "Brielle, wow, that's big news. Who's the father?" I asked, a gentle smile on my face. This was unexpected, but maybe it was the good news our family needed. Brielle took a deep breath and looked down at her hands, which were shaking in her lap. She didn't answer immediately. A strange, heavy silence fell over the room. I looked at my parents. My mother's face had gone pale, and my father was staring at Brielle with an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't just surprise, it was something else. Fear, dread. "Brielle," my father said, his voice low and dangerous. "Who is the father?" She finally lifted her head, and her eyes met mine for a fleeting second before darting away. They were filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "It's Gavin," she whispered, the words barely audible. The world stopped. The sounds of the room, the ticking clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, faded into a roaring in my ears. It couldn't be, I must have misheard. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice a strangled whisper. "Gavin is the father," she repeated, a little louder this time, as if saying it again made it more real. She looked at me, her expression pleading. It happened, Kinsley. We didn't mean for it to. We fell in love." Fell in love. The words were so absurd, so grotesquely inappropriate that I almost laughed. The kind, brotherly hugs, the patient listening, the late nights at the office, her constant presence in my apartment after he left, her fierce defense of me, it all clicked into place, each piece a new, searing betrayal. They hadn't fallen in love. They had been having an affair. My boyfriend and my sister. Behind my back, in my home, while I was at work designing a future that included them both. Her support hadn't been a lifeline, it had been a smokescreen. She wasn't holding me up, she was holding me in place while they made their getaway. The grief I had felt for my lost relationship was instantly eclipsed by a white-hot rage so intense it made me dizzy. I looked at my sister, the person I had loved and protected my entire life, and I didn't recognize her. I looked at my parents, their faces a mixture of shock and pity for me, pity for the situation, and I felt utterly and completely alone. The double betrayal was complete. My world hadn't just cracked, it had been leveled. The immediate aftermath of Brielle's confession was chaos. My mother burst into tears, not tears of sympathy for me, but tears of panic for the family's reputation and the impending scandal. My father, after a moment of stunned silence, erupted. He slammed his fist on the dining table, making the plates jump. His anger, however, was not directed where I expected. He wasn't yelling at Brielle for her betrayal or at the ghost of Gavin for his duplicity. He was yelling about the situation, the mess, the complication of it all. A baby? With him? What were you thinking, Brielle? How could you let this happen? His words were accusatory, but they were focused on the consequence, not the crime. It was as if the affair itself was secondary to the inconvenient reality of a pregnancy. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I felt strangely calm, a chilling, hollow clarity cutting through the rage. "You knew," I said, looking directly at my mother. It wasn't a question. Her eyes widened, and she started shaking her head, dabbing at her tears with a napkin. "No, Kinsley, no, we just found out. Brielle told us yesterday. We didn't know how to tell you." Yesterday, the word was acid in my mouth. You've known for a full day that my sister is pregnant with my ex-boyfriend's baby, and you sat here and served me roast chicken. "We were trying to find the right time," my mother wailed. "We didn't want to upset you." The absurdity of her statement was breathtaking. The betrayal wasn't what upset them, it was my potential reaction to it. I looked from my mother's tear-streaked face to my father's thunderous one, and then to Brielle, who was now crying silently, hunched over in her chair, a perfect victim. The entire scene felt staged, a performance for my benefit. I was no longer a daughter or a sister. I was an obstacle, a problem to be managed. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't grab my coat or my purse. I just walked out into the cool night air, got in my car, and drove away, the sound of my mother calling my name fading behind me. For the next week, I was unreachable. I blocked their numbers. I didn't answer the door. I took a leave of absence from work, citing a family emergency, which felt like the most bitter of ironies. I existed in a state of suspended animation, the four walls of my apartment both a prison and a sanctuary. The rage I had felt at the dinner table had cooled into something harder and heavier, a profound sense of disillusionment. It wasn't just the affair. It was the conspiracy of silence that followed. It was the realization that in my family's eyes, Brielle's needs, now amplified by her pregnancy, would always supersede my own. I was the capable one, the strong one. I was expected to absorb the blow and move on quietly. After a week of silence, they escalated. A registered letter arrived, sent from my father. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a letter of apology or explanation. It was a formal request for a family meeting. It stated that they needed to discuss important family financial matters that had become urgent due to Brielle's situation. The cold, businesslike tone of the letter was a clear signal. This was not about healing or reconciliation. This was about logistics. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was up against. I drove back to my parents' house, the same place where my life had imploded just a week earlier. This time, there was no pretense of a family meal. We sat in the formal living room, the one reserved for important guests and bad news. Gavin was there. He was sitting next to Brielle on the sofa, his arm resting proprietorially on the back of the couch behind her. He had the audacity to give me a small, mournful look, as if we were both victims of circumstance. I ignored him, my gaze as cold and hard as granite. My father, Howard, took the floor, standing before the fireplace like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "Kinsley, thank you for coming," he began, his tone stiff. "We are in a difficult situation, and we need to be practical." He then proceeded to lay out their practical solution. He spoke of the importance of providing a stable home for his first grandchild. He talked about financial responsibility and family duty. And then he got to the point. My maternal grandmother, who had passed away 2 years prior, had left a significant inheritance to be split equally between me and Brielle. The funds were held in a trust, to be dispersed to each of us upon our 35th birthday or upon marriage, whichever came first. I was 3 years away from my 35th birthday. Brielle was 8 years away. My grandmother, a shrewd and traditional woman, had structured it this way to encourage us to build stable lives before gaining access to the money. "Brielle and Gavin are getting married," my father announced. "They need to buy a house, get established before the baby comes. They can't do that with her inheritance locked up for another 7 years. I stared at him, my mind working, connecting the dots. Her inheritance is tied to marriage, I stated, my voice flat. So she marries Gavin and she gets her half. What does this have to do with me? My mother, Lorraine, spoke up then, her voice soft and pleading. Kinsley, honey, your half is just sitting there. You don't need it right now. You have your career, your savings. Brielle has nothing. This baby is coming. And there it was, the ultimatum. It was so audacious, so unbelievably entitled, that I felt a moment of pure, unadulterated disbelief. You want my inheritance, I said, the words tasting like poison. You want me to give my half of Grandma's money to the two people who destroyed my life, so they can go buy a house and play happy families. It's not giving it up permanently, Gavin interjected, his voice smooth and reasonable. We'd consider it a loan. We'd pay you back over time, of course. Brielle finally spoke, her voice thick with self-pity. I don't know why you have to be so difficult, Kinsley. This is your niece or nephew. Don't you care about their future? I thought you are the one who always took care of me. I need you to do this for me, for the baby. The emotional blackmail was staggering. They had framed their demand as a test of my character. If I said no, I was the bitter, selfish sister, punishing an innocent child for the sins of its parents. They had taken my greatest heartbreak and were attempting to leverage it for financial gain. They weren't just asking for money, they were demanding that I finance my own betrayal. They expected me to step aside, to sacrifice my future for theirs, to bless their union with my grandmother's legacy. They had completely misjudged me. They saw the quiet, dependable Kinsley, the one who always cleaned up their messes. They didn't see the woman who had spent a week forging her grief into a shield of resolve. They expected me to crumble. They had no idea I was about to build a fortress. I left that family meeting in a state of icy fury. The shock had worn off, the grief had been cauterized, and what remained was a crystalline, diamond-hard resolve. They had not only betrayed me on the deepest personal level, but they had also fundamentally underestimated me. They saw me as an emotional creature who would either lash out in a fit of pique or collapse into a puddle of forgiving tears. They never imagined I would respond with cold, calculating logic. They were about to learn that an architect doesn't just design beautiful things. An architect understands structure, stress points, and the precise amount of pressure required to make a faulty building collapse. The first thing I did was call the only person I knew I could trust implicitly, my old college roommate and best friend, Chloe. Chloe was a corporate lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a mind like a steel trap and a fierce sense of loyalty. I laid out the entire sordid story for her over the phone, from the breakup to the pregnancy announcement to the outrageous demand for my inheritance. She listened patiently, a skill she had honed in her profession, letting me vent all my frustration and disbelief without interruption. When I was finished, there was a brief pause on the line. Okay, she said, her voice calm and steady. First of all, I'm getting on the next flight. I'll be there tomorrow. Second, do not, under any circumstances, communicate with any of them. No texts, no calls, no emails. You are a black hole. Got it? Got it, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I wasn't alone anymore. Third, she continued, they have made a grave tactical error. They've shown their hand. They're not just two idiots who fell into an affair, they're greedy. And greed makes people stupid and sloppy. We can use that. Chloe arrived the next day, a whirlwind of efficiency and purpose. She transformed my apartment from a cocoon of sorrow into a strategic command center. She made me eat a proper meal, then sat me down at my dining table, which was now covered with notepads and her laptop. Right, she said, pushing up the sleeves of her blazer. Let's reframe this. This is no longer a family drama. This is a hostile negotiation. Your family members are the opposing counsel. Your inheritance is the asset. Our objective is not just to protect the asset, but to ensure they understand that their actions have permanent consequences. Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. She wasn't offering me pity, she was offering me a plan. She was validating my anger and giving it a productive outlet. The heartbreak began to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose. For the first time in over a month, I felt like myself again, the methodical, detail-oriented architect who thrived on solving complex problems. Our first step was information gathering. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with, Chloe explained. The trust. I need a copy of the full document, not just your father's interpretation of it. I had a copy stored in a safe deposit box, along with my other important documents. The next morning, we went to the bank. Reading through the legal jargon of my grandmother's will with Chloe was an education. The terms were exactly as my father had described. The inheritance was to be dispersed upon marriage or at the age of 35. However, Chloe pointed out a crucial clause we had overlooked. It was a discretionary clause, often called a spendthrift or no contest provision. It stated that if any beneficiary attempted to contest the will, challenge the trustee's decisions in bad faith, or bring the family name into disrepute, through actions deemed morally turpitudinous, the trustee, who was my grandmother's longtime estate lawyer, a man named Mr. Abernathy, had the right to withhold or redirect that beneficiary's funds. Morally turpitudinous, Chloe read aloud, a slow smile spreading across her face. That is a beautiful, beautiful phrase. An affair with your sister's long-term partner, resulting in a pregnancy, and a subsequent attempt to emotionally blackmail her out of her inheritance. I think that qualifies. Our strategy began to take shape. This was no longer just about saying no. This was about building a case. We needed to prove that Brielle's actions and our family's subsequent demands constituted a violation of the spirit, if not the letter, of the trust. Our target was not my family. It was Mr. Abernathy, the trustee. We didn't need to win a fight with them. We needed to present him with a clear, undeniable picture of their character and their motives. The next phase was evidence collection. Chloe was meticulous. We need a timeline, she said, drawing a long line across a whiteboard she had insisted on buying. Every text, every event, every suspicious late night, we build a narrative. We spent days piecing it together. I went through old text messages between myself and Gavin, noting the increasing frequency of his late nights at the office. I cross-referenced them with my call logs with Brielle, realizing with a sickening lurch that her emergency calls for comfort often coincided with Gavin's supposed work crises. They hadn't just been opportunistic, they had been coordinated. We compiled social media posts. Brielle had posted a photo of her and Gavin at a bar, catching up a full 6 months before he broke up with me. At the time, she had claimed she'd run into him by chance. Now, it looked like a brazen clue hidden in plain sight. The most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. In my grief-fueled haze after the breakup, I had completely forgotten about the shared cloud account Gavin and I had used for photos. He had forgotten about it, too. While clearing out old files on my computer, I stumbled upon a folder of automatically synced photos from his phone. It was a digital graveyard of our relationship, full of pictures from vacations and holidays. But tucked away in a subfolder were photos from the last few months. Photos of him and Brielle. A selfie of them clinking wine glasses in a restaurant I didn't recognize. A picture of her sleeping in what was clearly his new apartment. And the final, gut-wrenching image, a photo of the positive pregnancy test, dated 2 weeks before he had packed his boxes and told me he was unhappy. He hadn't left me because he was unhappy. He had left me because my sister was pregnant. His carefully constructed narrative of growing apart was a lie designed to make him look like a tragic, conflicted man instead of the cheating coward he truly was. Every tear I had shed, every moment of self-doubt I had endured, had been based on a complete fabrication. Chloe and I sat in silence, looking at the photo on my laptop screen. The heartbreak was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now overlaid with a cold, hard sense of vindication. "This is it," Chloe said quietly. "This is the cornerstone of our case. They didn't just have an affair. They orchestrated a cover-up, and their current demand for your inheritance is the final act of that deception." The shift from heartbreak to strategy was complete. I was no longer a victim of their drama. I was the architect of their downfall. With our evidence gathered and our strategy defined, the next phase was to move from defense to offense. Chloe was adamant that we control the narrative and the timing. They're expecting you to either cave or to have an emotional outburst, she advised. They're not expecting a formal, calculated legal response. We're going to hit them with something they are completely unprepared for. Our first move was to formally engage Mr. Abernathy, the trustee of my grandmother's estate. Chloe drafted a letter. It was a masterpiece of professional restraint and veiled threat. It didn't accuse or attack. Instead, it formally requested clarification on the terms of the trust, specifically citing the discretionary clause regarding actions that could bring the family name into disrepute. The letter stated that I had recently become aware of certain circumstances involving the other beneficiary, Brielle, which could potentially impact her eligibility. It politely requested a meeting with Mr. Abernathy to discuss these sensitive matters in person at his earliest convenience. We sent it via certified mail, a clear signal that this was now a formal legal matter. While we waited for his response, my family's campaign of harassment intensified. They had clearly interpreted my silence as weakness, a sign that I was wrestling with my conscience and would eventually succumb to their demands. My phone was bombarded with messages. My mother sent long, rambling texts filled with guilt trips about family unity and the needs of the poor, innocent baby. My father left curt, angry voicemails, demanding I stop being childish and do the right thing. Brielle sent tearful messages, complete with ultrasound photos, asking how I could be so cruel as to deny my future niece or nephew a stable home. And Gavin, in the most galling mauve. E of all sent an email with a detailed 5-year repayment plan for my inheritance, as if it were a standard business loan. Chloe had me forward every single message to her. She meticulously saved and cataloged each one, adding them to our growing mountain of evidence under a file labeled coercion and harassment. Keep ignoring them, she instructed. Let them dig their own graves. Mr. Abernathy's office responded within a week, scheduling a meeting for the following Tuesday. He was an old-school lawyer, his office filled with dark wood, leather-bound books, and the faint scent of paper and polish. He was in his late 70s, with sharp eyes and a deliberate, thoughtful manner. He had known my grandmother for over 40 years and had a deep respect for her memory. Chloe and I sat across from his large mahogany desk. She led the meeting, laying out our case with calm, irrefutable precision. She didn't present it as a story of heartbreak. She presented it as a clear breach of fiduciary and moral duty. She started with the timeline of the affair, supported by the text message logs. She moved on to the coordinated deceptions surrounding the breakup, culminating in the date-stamped photo of the pregnancy test. Finally, she presented the barrage of texts and emails from my family, framing them as a concerted effort to coerce me into relinquishing my portion of the trust under duress. Throughout the presentation, Mr. Abernathy remained silent, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. He examined the evidence we provided, the printouts of texts, the social media posts, the photograph with careful attention. When Chloe was finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow sigh. Your grandmother, he began, his voice raspy with age, was a woman of immense integrity. She valued character above all else. This clause, he said, tapping a copy of the trust, was important to her. She believed that her legacy should not be used to reward dishonesty or disgraceful behavior. He looked at me, his eyes softening with something that looked like sympathy. She was very proud of you, Kinsley, of your diligence and your strength of character. He paused, looking down at the evidence again. This is deeply troubling. An attempt to defraud a trust by concealing the nature of a relationship, followed by a campaign of intimidation to secure funds from another beneficiary, is a very serious matter. Chloe seized the opening. Mr. Abernathy, my client is not seeking to punish her sister or to claim her share of the inheritance. Her primary goal is to protect the integrity of her grandmother's wishes and to ensure that she is not financially penalized for being the victim of a profound deception. We believe that Brielle's actions, and the subsequent coordinated pressure from the family, fall squarely within the scope of the discretionary clause you mentioned. Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly. I am inclined to agree. The evidence is compelling. The spirit of the trust has, at the very least, been violated. He assured us he would be reviewing the matter internally and would be in touch. We left his office feeling a profound sense of victory. We hadn't just presented a case. We had found an ally in the one person with the power to act. The final piece of our counteroffensive was the letter we sent to my family. It was short, formal, and delivered by a legal courier to my parents' house, addressed to all four of them. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that I would not be relinquishing any portion of my inheritance. It went on to say that due to their recent and persistent campaign of harassment, I had been forced to retain legal counsel to protect my interests. It informed them that we had met with Mr. Abernathy, the trustee of the estate, and had provided him with a full accounting of the circumstances surrounding their request. The letter concluded by stating that all future communication regarding this or any other matter must be directed to my lawyer, Chloe, and that any attempt to contact me directly would be considered further harassment. We knew this letter would be a grenade thrown into their camp. Their entire strategy was predicated on their ability to manipulate me emotionally. By inserting a lawyer and the trustee into the equation, we had shifted the battlefield from the family living room to the legal arena, a territory where their tactics of guilt and intimidation were useless. They had wanted a quiet, private negotiation where they held all the emotional cards. We had responded with a formal, documented, legal counteroffensive. The trap was set. Now, all we had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The fallout from our letter was immediate and explosive. My phone, which had been buzzing with their manipulative texts, fell silent. The silence, however, was not one of acceptance. It was the eerie calm before a storm. Chloe received a single, sputtering, furious phone call from my father. He shouted. He threatened to sue her for interfering in a private family matter, and he accused me of trying to steal my sister's birthright out of spite. Chloe handled him with infuriating calm, simply repeating that if he wished to discuss the matter further, he would need to do so through his own legal counsel. He hung up on her. 2 weeks later, we received a formal letter from a lawyer they had hired. It was aggressive and full of bluster, demanding that I cease my slanderous communications with the trustee and immediately agree to their reasonable family arrangement. It threatened legal action if I failed to comply. Chloe read it with a smirk. "They're panicking," she said. "This is what people do when they have no legal leg to stand on. They get loud." The final confrontation was orchestrated by Mr. Abernathy. He called a mandatory meeting for all beneficiaries of the trust, along with their legal counsel, to be held at his office. This was it, the reckoning. I walked into that conference room with Chloe by my side, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Across the long, polished table sat my entire family, my father looking like a thundercloud, my mother looking anxious and pale, and Brielle, her pregnancy now more pronounced, sitting close to Gavin. They were a united front of simmering resentment. Their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, sat at the head of their side of the table, shuffling papers with an air of theatrical importance. Mr. Abernathy entered the room and took his seat at the head of the table, commanding immediate silence. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "We are here today to resolve the matter of the trust of the late Eleanor Vance," he began, his voice resonating with authority. "I have reviewed the terms of the trust in detail, and I have considered the information brought to my attention by Ms. Kinsley Vance and her counsel, as well as the response from Mr. and Mrs. Vance on behalf of Ms. Brielle Vance." He paused, looking directly at my parents, then at Brielle. "The trust, as many of you know, contains a discretionary clause. This clause grants the trustee the authority to act in the event that a beneficiary engages in behavior that is deemed deceitful, immoral, or brings the family into disrepute. It is my determination, as trustee of this estate, that such a situation has occurred." A collective gasp went through my family. Brielle's face went white. Gavin put a hand on her arm, but it seemed more like a gesture to restrain her than to comfort her. Their lawyer immediately spoke up. "Mr. Abernathy, with all due respect, My clients' personal lives are not subject to your review. My client, Ms. Brielle Vance, is entitled to her inheritance upon her marriage, as stipulated. Any attempt to deny her this is a gross overreach of your authority, and we will contest it vigorously in court." Mr. Abernathy didn't flinch. He simply slid a folder across the table toward their lawyer. "Contest it with this," he said calmly. The lawyer opened the folder. Inside were copies of everything Chloe and I had compiled: the timeline of the affair, the text messages, the social media posts, the date-stamped photo of the pregnancy test, and on top, a thick stack of printouts of every single coercive text, email, and voicemail my family had sent me after I had initially refused their demand. "What you will find in that folder," Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice hardening, "is not a simple story of a personal failing. It is a documented pattern of deception, manipulation, and intimidation. It shows a coordinated effort to defraud one beneficiary for the financial gain of another. The affair is the moral component. The cover-up and subsequent harassment campaign are the legal components. Together, they represent a profound violation of the spirit and intent of this trust." He turned his gaze to Brielle. "Ms. Vance, your grandmother intended this money to be a foundation for an honest and respectable life. She did not intend for it to be a reward for deceit." He then looked at my parents. "And she certainly did not intend for her legacy to be used as a tool for emotional blackmail within her own family." My father started to speak, his face turning a dangerous shade of red, but Mr. Abernathy held up a hand, silencing him. "I have made my decision. Pursuant to the authority granted to me by the trust, I am enacting the discretionary clause. Ms. Brielle Vance's access to the trust funds will be indefinitely frozen." The room erupted. Brielle burst into hysterical sobs. "You can't do this. It's my money. Kinsley did this. She's punishing me." Gavin jumped to his feet. "This is insane. We'll sue you. We'll sue everyone." My father was shouting at Mr. Abernathy, calling him a senile old fool. My mother was pleading with me across the table. "Kinsley, please, stop this. Tell him to stop. She's your sister. Think of the baby." Through it all, I remained. Ined silent, I looked at their faces, contorted with rage and desperation, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty distance. They weren't angry about the affair or the lies. They were angry that they had been caught. They were furious that their plan had failed, that their sure thing, the quiet, dependable Kinsley, had refused to play her part. Chloe stood up. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "My client has one more proposal." The room fell quiet again, all eyes turning to me. "Kinsley does not wish to see her sister destitute," Chloe stated. "Nor does she wish for her future niece or nephew to suffer. Therefore, she is willing to authorize the trust to release a small, fixed monthly stipend to Brielle, sufficient to cover basic living expenses and prenatal care. However, this offer is conditional. It is conditional on all parties signing a legally binding agreement to cease all contact with Kinsley indefinitely. No calls, no texts, no emails, no uninvited visits. Any breach of this agreement will result in the immediate and permanent termination of the stipend." It was a masterstroke. I was offering them a lifeline, but on my terms. I was providing for the child, stripping them of their moral high ground, while simultaneously guaranteeing my own freedom. It was not an act of forgiveness. It was an act of severance. Their lawyer, seeing his case crumbling, immediately began advising them to take the deal. They were cornered. A long, ugly, and likely unsuccessful court battle, or a guaranteed income and a clean break. After a hushed, frantic conference, they reluctantly agreed. The papers were drawn up and signed right there in the conference room. As my father signed his name, he wouldn't look at me. My mother cried silently. Brielle stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. In that moment, I knew I had not just won a legal battle. I had lost a family, but I had gained my life back. Walking out of Mr. Abernathy's office that day was like stepping out of a pressurized chamber into the open air. The weight that had been crushing my chest for months was finally gone. It wasn't a jubilant, fist-pumping victory. It was a quiet, solemn release. The ties that had bound me to my family, ties of love, obligation, and a shared history, had been irrevocably severed. The signing of that legal document was the final demolition of a structure that I now realized had been unsound for years. The aftermath was silent. My family, true to the agreement, disappeared from my life. There were no more manipulative texts, no angry voicemails, no surprise visits. The sudden peace was almost jarring at first. I had grown so accustomed to the constant state of anxiety and conflict that the quiet felt unnatural. But slowly, I began to adjust to the new, peaceful architecture of my life. The apartment that had once felt like a tomb of memories began to feel like my own space again. I rearranged the furniture, packed away the last vestiges of Gavin, and filled the empty spaces with things that brought me joy: art from local creators, shelves of books I'd always meant to read, and plants that thrived in the bright afternoon light. I was reclaiming my territory, both physically and emotionally. Work became my sanctuary and my salvation. I poured my energy back into my designs, finding a renewed sense of purpose and creativity. My boss, who had been incredibly understanding during my leave of absence, noticed the change in me. I was more focused, more confident, and my work reflected it. I led a project to design a new community library, a building that was all about creating a safe, open, and welcoming space for everyone. The irony was not lost on me. As I designed a foundation for a community, I was rebuilding my own. The project was a massive success, earning our firm an award and me a promotion to senior partner. I was no longer just a junior partner. I was a recognized leader in my field, standing entirely on my own merit. Chloe remained my rock. Our friendship, forged in the crucible of this crisis, became one of the central pillars of my new life. We celebrated my promotion with expensive champagne, toasting to new beginnings. "You know," she said, raising her glass, "in a way, they gave you a gift." I looked at her confused. "A gift, Chloe, they tried to ruin my life." "No," she corrected me gently. "They tried to take your money. In doing so, they revealed their true selves and gave you the freedom to walk away. They freed you from a future with a cheating partner and a lifetime of being the family shock absorber. They showed you how strong you really are. That's a gift, Kinsley. A painful one, but a gift nonetheless." She was right. The pain of the betrayal had been immense, but it had also been clarifying. It had forced me to reevaluate every relationship in my life, to draw firm boundaries, and to rely on my own strength in a way I never had before. I had learned to distinguish between a foundation and a facade. About a year after the final meeting, I received a formal, impersonal notification from Mr. Abernathy's office. It was an annual statement from the trust. Tucked into the envelope was a small, separate note from Mr. Abernathy himself. It simply said that Brielle had given birth to a healthy baby boy and that the stipend was being dispersed as agreed. There was no other information. It was a cold, transactional fact, a distant echo from a life that was no longer mine. I felt a faint, detached sadness for the innocent child caught in the middle of it all, but I felt no regret for my decision. I had done what was necessary to protect myself and to honor the integrity of my grandmother's legacy. My only obligation now was to live a life that she would have been proud of. I eventually sold the apartment I had shared with Gavin. It held too many ghosts. I bought a small house in a quiet, older neighborhood, a fixer-upper with good bones and a lot of potential, much like myself. I spent my weekends drafting plans, tearing down walls, and building it into my own perfect space. It was a slow, methodical process, and with every nail I hammered and every wall I painted, I felt a sense of profound peace. I was no longer just designing buildings for other people. I was designing a life for myself, on my own terms, from the ground up.